People don't regret the things that they did nearly as much as they regret the things that they didn't do. They regret the chances not taken, the words left unsaid, the dreams deferred until someday that never came. Welcome to the Kindness Extremist Podcast. I'm your host, Shola Richards, aka Brother Teresa. I've spoken to tens of thousands of people all over the world about the importance of kindness. And I am obsessed with how we can bring more kindness into our daily lives and restore balance to a deeply unbalanced world. Every episode, I'll give you 3 practical strategies to create a kinder world, and I'll do it in 30 minutes or less. No fluff, just valuable, actionable content that you can implement in your life immediately after listening to help you actively create a kinder world. There's no time to waste. Let's dive in. What's up, my friend? Welcome back to episode 41 of the Kindness Experience Podcast. I'm your host, Shola Richards, aka Brother Teresa. And since it's the first week of 2026, Happy New Year. Can you believe we're already in the first week of 2026? If you're anything like me, you probably spent some time recently thinking about the changes that you want to make, the goals you want to pursue, and the person you want to become this year. And if you're really like me, you've also been thinking about the fears that are standing between you and that better version of yourself. So yes, this first episode of 2026 is all about how to confront our fears in the new year and beyond. There's an old saying that inside the cave you fear lies the treasure you seek. I've been thinking a lot about that lately, and I want to share something personal with you. So for years, I knew intellectually that therapy would benefit me. I read the research, I'd seen how to help others, I understood the value, but I was still scared to start for reasons that I couldn't quite articulate. Maybe I was afraid about what I discovered about myself. Maybe I worried that going to therapy meant that I was broken or weak. Maybe I just didn't want to face the painful memories and emotions I've been successfully avoiding for decades. Whatever the reason, though, the bottom line is that the cave was absolutely terrifying to me. Thankfully, I took a deep breath. I entered the cave by starting therapy. And you know what? Not only was inside the cave not nearly as scary as I thought, but more importantly, by facing these fears, it literally changed the course of my life. So here's the point of me sharing this with you. The rewards that we truly want in life are almost always on the other side of fear. That meaningful career change that we crave requires the scary step of leaving stability. The deep relationship that we really desire requires the vulnerability of opening our hearts. The life that we dream about requires the courage to take risks and face uncertainty. But so many of us stand at the entrance of the cave paralyzed. We convince ourselves that we're being realistic, practical, or cautious. But in reality, we're going to keep it real here. We always do in this podcast. The reality is that we're just scared. And that fear is what's keeping us from the very things that would bring us the most fulfillment. I see it everywhere. The person who wants to start their own business but is too afraid to leave their unfulfilling corporate job. The individual who knows they need to end a toxic relationship but fears being alone. The artist who has a story to tell but is terrified of being judged. The person struggling with their mental health who knows that they need professional help but is scared to take that first step. Look, we all have caves that we're afraid to enter, and we all have elaborate justifications for why we should stay outside where it's safe. But please hear me when I say this. Safety is overrated. Comfort zones are called that for a reason. They're comfortable, but they're also limiting. The treasure you seek, the life you actually want to live, the person you want to become, the impact you want to make is inside of that cave, not somewhere else, not in the safe zone, not in the comfortable, familiar territory you've been occupying for years. So today, I'm going to share 3 uncommon strategies to help you finally enter your cave and face your fears. None of these strategies include the typical, don't let your fears stop you nonsense. We don't want time for that, because if you're like me, you're probably thinking, okay, that sounds cool and all, but how in the hell am I supposed to do that? Instead, these strategies I'll be covering in this episode are practical, psychology-backed approaches that have worked for me and for countless others. So if you're ready to stop standing at the entrance of the cave and finally step inside, let's get to it. Actually, hold on. One more thing before we dive in. I want you to know that this episode is not about toxic positivity that's urging you to ignore your fears and think positive thoughts only, or some equally toxic bro energy that's trying to convince you that fear is for weak-minded punks. Enough of that silliness. This is about developing a healthier, more productive relationship with fear, one where your fear informs your decisions without controlling them. Because real talk, we're all scared of something. The question is whether we're going to let that fear stop us or whether we're going to find ways to move forward despite it. Okay, now let's dive in. I know this first strategy might sound a little strange, but stick with me on this because it's incredibly powerful. The first uncommon way to overcome your fears is to befriend your fear through personification. Give your fear a name, a personality, even a backstory. This strategy is incredibly powerful because it creates psychological distance and transforms an abstract threat into something you can engage with almost conversationally. Let me explain what I mean. So personally, for the longest time, whenever I faced a situation that scared me, whether it was a big keynote presentation, a difficult conversation, or putting my creative work out into the world, I would feel this like overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. It was shapeless, nameless, and all consuming. How in the world do you fight something that you can't even describe? Then I discovered the power of personification. I gave my fear a name, Scared Shola. And y'all, let me tell you, Scared Shola is a whole character. He's a version of me that's constantly looking out for reasons why things won't work out. He's the one whispering in my ear, "Who do you think you are?" Or, "What if everyone laughs at you?" Or, "You should just stay in your lane, son." Now, once I gave my fear a name and a personality, something shifted. Instead of being consumed by this nameless dread, I could actually have an actual dialogue with it. So when Scared Shola shows up before a keynote speech, I can say, Oh, there you are. I was actually wondering when you're going to show up here. Look, bro, I get it. You're worried that we're going to bomb on that stage. I appreciate you trying to protect us from embarrassment, but I put in the work, man. I've got this. So you're welcome to come along for the ride, but you're not driving. So have a seat in the back and be quiet because I got some really important work to do. I get it. This might sound silly to you, but there's real psychology behind this. When we externalize our fear, when we treat it as something separate from our core identity, we gain the ability to observe it objectively rather than being consumed by it. It's the difference between saying, "I am afraid," versus "I am experiencing fear." That subtle shift creates space between you and the emotion. Personally, I've found it so much easier to negotiate with Scared Shola rather than a shapeless, malevolent, omnipotent force of existential terror. Who has the ability to defeat something like that? Scared Shola, on the other hand, has become almost like an old friend at this point. One who's a little paranoid and pessimistic, sure, but one whose intentions come from a place of wanting to protect me. Here's the thing about fear that most people don't understand. Fear is not your enemy. Fear is just your brain's ancient alarm system trying to keep you safe. The problem is that this alarm system was designed for a world where the main threats were saber-toothed tigers, not Zoom presentations. So the alarm consistently goes off at inappropriate times. When you're about to ask for a raise, or when you're considering leaving a toxic relationship, or when you're thinking about sharing your creative work with the world. When you personify your fear, you can acknowledge its positive intention, which again is protecting you from harm, while also recognizing that it might be overreacting to the current situation. For example, you can say, "Thank you for trying to keep me safe, but this actually isn't dangerous. This is just uncomfortable, and uncomfortable won't kill me." Also, feel free to call your fear whatever you like. Maybe it's Nervous Nancy or Anxious Andy. And side note, it does not matter what it is. It doesn't matter what you call it, but I feel like alliteration adds a little extra personal touch to the name. Still though, the name doesn't matter. What does matter is that you're creating separation between your core self and your fear response. So here's your first practical kindness strategy of the episode. This week, I want you to give your fear a name and a personality. Think about the voice of doubt that shows up in your head when you're about to do something scary. What does it say? What is it worried about? Give it a name that feels right to you. Then, the next time fear shows up, try having a conversation with it and call it by name. Acknowledge its concerns. Thank it for trying to protect you, and then gently remind it that you're the one in charge, not the fear. You might feel silly at first, but I promise you, this simple act of personification can transform your relationship with fear from adversarial to almost collaborative. And here's the kindness connection, because you know it's going to bring it back to kindness, right? When you befriend your fear, you're practicing self-compassion. You're treating yourself with the same gentleness that you'd offer a scared friend. Instead of beating yourself up for being afraid, you're acknowledging the fear, understanding where it comes from, and then responding with kindness rather than judgment. This is what kindness extremists do. We extend kindness not just to others, but to every part of ourselves, including the scared parts. All right, let's talk about the second uncommon way to overcome your fears, and I call this strategy fear proximity. You've probably already heard of exposure therapy, right? The idea is that if you're afraid of something, you should confront it directly and repeatedly until the fear diminishes. And while there's merit to that approach, let's be real. For most of us, diving headfirst into our biggest fears isn't realistic or sustainable. So that's where fear proximity comes in. Instead of confronting a fear head on, you engage with something that's one step removed from it. So you're not jumping to the deep end, you're getting comfortable in the shallow water first. Let me give you some examples to help make this more concrete. So let's say you're terrified of public speaking. The traditional exposure approach would be to sign up for an open mic night or volunteer to give a presentation at work. But for someone with genuine public speaking anxiety, that might be too overwhelming to even think about, much less try. Fear proximity says, okay, start by recording voice memos just for yourself. Talk to your phone like you're explaining something to a friend. No audience, no pressure. Just get comfortable hearing your own voice making points out loud. Then, maybe you graduate to leaving voice messages for friends instead of text. Then maybe record a video of yourself talking just for you to watch. Then maybe you share that video with one trusted person. See what's happening? You're building familiarity with the components of public speaking, hearing your voice, organizing your thoughts out loud, being on camera without the full stress response that comes from standing in front of an actual audience. Let me give you another example. Let's say you have a fear of heights. The direct exposure approach would be like skydiving or climb to a tall building or something like that. But fear proximity says start by watching first person climbing videos from the safety of your couch. Then maybe look at photos of beautiful views from high places. Then maybe visit a building with a glass floor on a low level. Then gradually increase the height as your comfort grows. See what we're doing here? The key insight here is that our brains don't always distinguish perfectly between experiencing something and observing something. So when you watch a first person video of someone rock climbing, parts of your brain activate as if you're doing the climbing yourself. It's wild. This allows you to build the kind of mental familiarity with the experience without the full physiological stress response. I've used this approach in my own life more times than I can count. Before I started doing keynote speeches, I spent months watching other speakers deliver their talks. I studied their body language, their pacing, their use of pauses. I recorded myself giving pretend speeches to an empty room. I practiced in front of people at Toastmasters who were also learning the art of public speaking and, quite frankly, with the most supportive audience imaginable. By the time I stepped on an actual stage, I had already done hundreds of adjacent repetitions. The beauty of fear proximity is that it respects where you are right now while still moving you forward. You're not forcing yourself to make a giant leap. You're taking manageable steps that build confidence over time. Let me give you a few more fear proximity examples for common fears. Fear of rejection. Before asking for that raise or putting yourself out there romantically, practice receiving small rejections in low stakes situations. Ask for a discount somewhere that probably won't give you one. Request a table upgrade at a restaurant. Get comfortable with hearing no when the stakes are low, and it becomes less terrifying when the stakes are higher. Here's another one. Fear of confrontation. Before having that difficult conversation with your toxic family member, practice setting small boundaries in less charged relationships. Tell a friend that you can't make it to their event when you're genuinely tired. Kindly push back on a colleague's suggestion in a meeting. This is about building your confrontation muscle in situations that feel safer. Fear of failure? Before launching that business or pursuing that dream, study people who have failed and have come back stronger. Read their stories. Understand that failure isn't fatal. Let their experience normalize failure for you before you risk experiencing it for yourself. So here's your second practical kindness strategy of the episode. Identify one fear, just one, that's holding you back. And instead of trying to confront it directly, find something adjacent to it that you can engage with this week. If you're afraid of writing and sharing your ideas publicly, start by journaling privately. If you're afraid of networking events, start by commenting on people's LinkedIn posts. If you're afraid of asking for help, start by accepting help when it's offered without apologizing for it. The goal isn't to avoid your fear forever, it's to build the familiarity and the confidence you need to eventually face it head on. Fear proximity is the bridge that will get you there. Now, I also want to acknowledge something important here. Practicing fear proximity isn't taking the easy way out. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. It's understanding that sustainable change happens gradually, not overnight. It's recognizing that you're playing a long game, and the most important thing to do in this game is to keep moving forward, even if the steps are small. Some of the strongest people I know are the ones who have the humility to say, I'm not ready to face this directly yet. I'm going to start where I am and build from there. That takes real courage, y'all. That takes genuine self-awareness, the self-awareness that's needed to overcome our fears. Hey, fellow kindness extremists, it's me, Shola. If you're picking up what I'm putting down, if you're mowing what I'm growing, if you're smelling what I'm stepping in. Okay, I'll stop. If you're enjoying what you're listening to so far, I would love it if you would take a moment to hit the subscribe button and leave a rating and a review. Those incredibly kind acts go so far in helping me to reach as many people as possible who will join the movement to actively create a kinder world. I appreciate you so much, my friend. Okay, let's get back to the episode. All right, my friend, we've reached the final strategy, and this one might be the most powerful of all. The third uncommon way to overcome your fears is to imagine receiving advice from your 90-year-old self. Here's the thing about fear. It is almost always focused on the short term. Fear is worried about what might happen tomorrow, next week, or next month. Fear is concerned with immediate discomfort, potential for embarrassment, and possible rejection. Fear lives in the now. But life isn't just about next week or the next month. Life is a long arc, and the decisions we make out of fear today can have compounding effects for decades. So here's the exercise. Close your eyes and imagine yourself at 90 years old. You've lived a full life. You've experienced joy, sorrow, success and failure, love and loss. You've accumulated 9 decades of hard-won wisdom. Now, from that vantage point, ask your 90-year-old self, what would I regret more? The discomfort of facing this fear or a life constrained by it? And let that question really land. Would your 90-year-old self advise you to stay in a loveless marriage because leaving feels too scary right now? Would that wise elder encourage you to remain at a toxic job because the uncertainty of change seems overwhelming? Would they tell you to keep putting your dreams on hold indefinitely because the fear of failure is paralyzing? I can almost guarantee you that the answer is no. Study after study on end-of-life regrets shows the same pattern. People don't regret the things that they did nearly as much as they regret the things that they didn't do. They regret the chances not taken, the words left unsaid, the dreams deferred until someday that never came. So when you consult your 90-year-old self, you're reframing fear as a short-term cost against long-term fulfillment. Yes, facing this fear might be uncomfortable right now. Yes, it might involve some pain, some awkwardness, and some uncertainty, but what's the alternative? A life where you never took the shot? A life constrained by the walls of your comfort zone? A life where you reach 90 and wonder, what if? I don't know about you, but just thinking about those outcomes scares the hell out of me. I use the strategy of talking to my future self all the time, y'all. When I was debating whether to leave my comfortable corporate job to pursue my speaking and writing full time, I was terrified. The fear of financial instability, of failure, of looking foolish, it was overwhelming. So I asked my 90-year-old self, will you regret staying safe or will you regret never trying? The answer was crystal clear. My 90-year-old self would have been devastated if I had let fear keep me from pursuing my purpose. That version of me could forgive failure, but it couldn't forgive never trying. When I was afraid to start therapy, the story that I shared in the beginning of this episode, I asked my 90-year-old self for guidance. Would you rather I spent the next several decades carrying around unprocessed trauma? Or would you rather that I did the scary work of healing now so I could live fully for the rest of my life? Again, the answer was obvious. The 90-year-old version of you has a perspective that present-day you doesn't have. Future you can see the full picture. Future you knows that the fear you're experiencing now is temporary, but the consequences of letting that fear control your choices can last a lifetime. Now, I want to be clear about something. This isn't about being reckless or ignoring genuine risks. Your 90-year-old self isn't going to encourage you to try to juggle flaming chainsaws while rollerblading down the freeway because YOLO. But your 90-year-old self will encourage you to stop confusing discomfort with danger. Your 90-year-old self will encourage you to take meaningful risks in pursuit of a meaningful life. And yes, your 90-year-old self will encourage you to enter the cave. So here's your third and final kind of strategy of the episode. Think about a fear that's currently holding you back from something important. Set aside 5 minutes in a quiet space. Close your eyes and vividly imagine yourself at 90 years old. Ask that wise, experienced version of yourself, what advice would you give me about this fear? What would you regret more, facing the discomfort or letting this fear define my life? Write down whatever comes to you. And then with that long-term perspective in mind, make a plan to take one step toward facing that fear this week. Let me bottom line this. You can either be controlled by your fears and arrive at 90 with a list of regrets, or you can face your fears and arrive at 90 knowing that you truly lived. The choice is yours. And let me add one more thing about this strategy. When you consult your 90-year-old self, you're not just making better decisions for future you, you're honoring the present you. You're saying, my life matters, my dreams matter, my potential matters too much to be sacrificed on the altar of temporary discomfort. That is a kindness extremist move right there. It's choosing to treat yourself as someone whose life is worth living fully, whose dreams are worth pursuing courageously, and whose fears are worth facing boldly. Okay, my friend, let's recap the 3 uncommon strategies we covered today for entering the cave and overcoming your fears. First, befriend your fear through personification. Give your fear a name, a personality, even a backstory. This creates psychological distance and transforms an overwhelming emotion into something you can actually have a conversation with. Remember, fear is not your enemy. It's an overprotective friend. So acknowledge it, thank it, and then most importantly, remind it of who's in charge. Second, practice fear proximity instead of direct exposure. Rather than jumping into the deep end with your biggest fears, engage with something one step removed. Build familiarity, confidence, and capability in lower stakes situations before tackling the main event. This respects where you are right now while still moving you forward. And third, receive advice from your 90-year-old self. Reframe fear as a short-term cost against long-term fulfillment. Ask the wisest version of yourself what they would regret more, the discomfort of facing this fear or a life constrained by it. Let that long-term perspective guide your choices today. So as we begin this new year, I want to leave you with this thought. We all have caves we're afraid to enter, every single one of us. The question isn't whether you have fears, of course you do. The question is whether you're going to let those fears keep you from the treasure that's waiting inside. The meaningful career, the authentic relationships, the creative expression, the healed heart, the life you actually want to live. It's all inside that cave. So take a deep breath, acknowledge your fear, maybe even say hi to it by name. Take one small step toward it using fear proximity, and remember that your 90-year-old self is cheering you on, knowing that the temporary discomfort of facing your fears is nothing compared to the regret of never trying. Since our fears aren't going anywhere, the choice is binary. You can either be scared and take action, or you can just stay scared and do nothing. Either way, know this: the cave is waiting for you, my friend, and thankfully, so is the treasure. This is your host, Shola Richards, aka Brother Teresa. You now know that kindness can't be weak because you just experienced the strength of the Kindness Extremist podcast. Until next time, my friend, the journey to a kinder world continues. Thank you for listening to the Kindness Extremist podcast. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I have one favor to ask. If you could kindly hit the subscribe button, leave a rating and a review, not only would that be incredibly kind, but by doing so, you're actively playing a role in growing this movement and ideally getting us one step closer to creating a kinder world. Hope to see you next week for another episode of the Kindness Extremist podcast. Bye for now.